And we are back here live from the AWS Sydney Summit, day number 2 at wonderful Darling Harbour. My name is Dean Samuels. I'm Solutions Architect Manager for Hong Kong and Taiwan. And I'm joined today with
Matt Fitzgerald, a technical evangelist.
Awesome, thank you for joining us, Matt. But of course, the most important person on the stage right now is this person right here from our friends at Atlassian. I'll let him introduce himself, but Hannes, over to you.
Oh yeah, thanks folks, good to be here. My name is Hannes. I'm an engineering manager at Atlassian, coming over straight from the Atlassian headquarters here in Sydney.
Right.
Great to be here.
Right. And I'm sure many of our viewers out there know who Atlassian is, Hannes, but for those that may not, can you maybe explain how Atlassian became one of Australia's most successful startups?
Oh yeah, so Atlassian, I think, very Australian company founded by Mike Cannon-Brooks and Scott Farquhar here in Sydney, and is probably best known for our team collaboration software. I think the software that probably everybody knows here is Trello and Jira. I myself working on Jira for 5 years now. So yeah, that's what we're doing.
Excellent. And I understand you're going to talk to us a little bit about a lightning talk you gave just previously around the lessons for front-end engineering at scale.
That's right.
Right. We actually had one of your colleagues, Brad Baker, yesterday, talking a little bit about GraphQL, and I know you're going to actually give us a deep dive into GraphQL and its actual applications in the real world.
Yeah. So the thing that I was talking about earlier is so Jira is in the process of a big UI update. That's originally a very design-driven exercise. We wanted to give it a bit of a refreshment, but it's also a big technology update. You know, Jira has been around for 17 years. Yeah. There's a fair bit of history and legacy that we're carrying with us. So we wanted to take that opportunity and really give Jira a good technology update, move it to a modern stack. Long story short, we're essentially transitioning Jira into a modern React-based single-page application.
Okay.
That should be pretty good.
Can you maybe explain React to the viewers?
Yeah. So React is essentially a front-end framework developed at Facebook, but a large open source community, a large open source ecosystem, and it. I think that the one thing that stands out is it embraces a very component-based architecture, a component-based mental model, which really allows us to build large-scale front-end applications, probably larger than any time before.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And I guess, what's the business driver for doing this? I mean, Jira, as it is, has been quite a successful platform. You mentioned it's 17 years legacy, but it is working. So what's the business driver and why React?
Look, I think the expectations of our users are evolving, right? Like when you think back how the World Wide Web was feeling 5 years ago, that's very different from how it feels today, and it will feel very different in 5 years from now, right? So I think it is really important for us to kind of keep refreshing and keep rethinking some of the interaction patterns that we are providing, and today, really, the expectation is you want a single page application, right? If you navigate from one page within Jira to another page in Jira, you don't want to wait a couple of seconds until everything is refreshing. You want a snappy experience.
Right.
That's what we're trying to provide.
Awesome, and I understand we have a question.
We do have a question.
Is that your question?
I want to ask that one towards the end of it, because I think it just seems. You can answer this in a minute, but you know, what about the non-sexy side of Jira? Like, is anything happening in the back end?
The non-sexy side. Okay. Obviously, a front-end developer.
Read into that what you will. Is there anything happening on the back end?
Yeah. Look, I think Jira is definitely. It's a constantly evolving piece of software, right? Yep. There's no time where nothing is happening. I think one of the things that we are a journey that we are embracing at the moment, that we are embarked on at the moment, is a transition from I want to say relatively monolithic Java backend. There was, historically Jira has been an on-premise software that you would install on your own server, and we're carrying around some of this history, right?
Yes.
So what we're doing right now on the backend is essentially a transition from this relatively monolithic Java application to a microservice architecture. AWS playing a big role here.
And so what would be some of the AWS services that you'd be using in the front end?
Oh, look, in the front end, I think there are two absolute no-brainers. S3, CloudFront, like, you need a CDN, right? You can't do front-end development without a CDN.
Right.
But we're also using the compute stack.
Okay.
So one technique that we are applying very, very successfully is called server-side rendering. That's a relatively new model, and the idea is modern UI frameworks such as React, they use JavaScript to generate the HTML. Now that is a little bit slower, right? The browser needs to do a lot of work to do that as compared to just downloading HTML.
Right.
So the idea behind server-side rendering is that you essentially think it as a virtual browser that is run on the backend.
Right.
You hit the URL, that virtual browser that is run in somewhere in AWS is rendering that HTML, and we are sending down the HTML.
So this is just-in-time rendering on the server side, as opposed to like what we saw with struts and JSP, where we actually compile JSP and.
I think the biggest difference is that traditionally, like generating HTML on the server, that's essentially that's how the internet used to work, right?
Yes, right.
That's not a new thing.
Well, there were static files, pretty much, right?
It was static files, and if it was not static files like servlets, there was a completely different code base running on the back end and on the front end. And we don't want that, right? We want a single code base that is run universally.
Right.
And in order to do that, we need a system in the backend that is able to run this code that is originally built for the browser.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good example here. You mentioned about S3 and CloudFront. Obviously can't have CDN without front end, or rather the other way around. And I would have said, well, can't you just simply scale CloudFront and S3 and leave it as it is? You're going to be able to grow to that large amount of scale. But what you explained there in terms of rendering on the server side is where you see that true efficiency, right?
Yeah. Look, also one of the things that I was talking about earlier is the front-end development has there are certain limitations on how you can scale, right? Like in traditional services world, you can scale horizontally and you can scale vertically, right? You can scale by the number of nodes and you can scale by the size of nodes.
Right.
In the front end, in the web, this is different. You scale extremely horizontally. There are millions of browsers, each of them doing the work, but you can't really scale vertically, right? You can't really control the hardware of your users.
Right.
And using server-side rendering is tricking the system a little bit, right? Because it allows you to do vertical scaling just on the back end.
Right, I see. Okay. Another concept you mentioned that might be related in your lightning talk was around micro front ends. Can you maybe explain what you mean by micro front ends to build these delightful experiences? Yeah,
look, I think we have done a lot of thinking, well, over decades really, on how to build large-scale systems in the backend, in the services world. Right, we know that. The good question, or a very important question, is now, can we transfer some of these learnings from the backend to the front end? And in the backend, what we've used very successfully over the last couple of years is a microservices architecture. And what microservices give you a couple of things, but one of them is independence, right? I can write my service in Java, you can write your service in Node, you can write your service in Haskell, and that's fine, right? It works. And this independence of teams is something we want to strive for. Now, there is an interesting debate in the front-end community on how far can we push that model, right? Can we separate our UI into independent areas that maybe use different technologies, are maybe deployed independently, are maybe served independently? Very interesting question. And that's essentially that goes under the label of micro front-ends.
Right.
One thing that is very, very important to consider here is, as much as we want to transfer these learnings over, there are certain unique characteristics that you have in the front end that you don't have in the back end, right? Like the browser is a unique environment. It is a single runtime, all code shares limited resources, which is essentially the browser CPU. So these are things to consider, and I think that's something that the front-end community is still figuring out.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
And moving to this React framework, does that mean we're going to see React components that developers can leverage Jira UI aspects of the user interface in their own portals or their own applications?
There is, you can do that to a certain degree. So what Atlassian is offering to our ecosystem, which is a very important part of the offering that we are making, is you can use a system of Atlassian themed UI components. It's called Atlas Kit, to build your own UI that then feels very, very integrated and feels very natural because it kind of embraces the Atlassian look and feel.
Right. Looks like we've generated a lot of interest from our developers out there. A couple of questions. One of our viewers, Sunil Kotia, sorry for the mispronunciation. Which one is powerful, React or Angular for single-page application development?
Oh man, look, I think like you can make arguments for.
The question should be which one's easier to work with.
Right.
Man, even that, like this is going to be
it's like the
a
Emacs
never-ending.
VI. It's like the Linux Windows. It's like everything. Ruby, Java.
Yeah. So a decision that we made as an organization is we were buying into React.
Yep.
This is where our design system is built on. This is where our applications are built on. This gives us a lot of opportunity to share code across the company. Look, I won't go into a debate on which one is better, right? You can argue either side. Right?
So what happens when the next one comes in, the next framework that's even more glitzy and more sort of shiny than React?
Yeah, look, one of the questions that somebody was asking at my lightning talk is, you're embarking on this multi-year journey to move Jira to a React single-page application. When you're done, there will be the next hottest thing.
Yep.
Will you get into straight another cycle?
Right.
And look, I think first off, well, maybe we do, right? Because I think this is the circle of life of software development, and we need to embrace that to a certain degree. At the same time, I think it is really less about the technology. It is more about the component-based mindset, right? Like in the services world, it doesn't really matter if you use, I don't know, Node.js or Go or whatever. It's the microservice idea that matters.
Right.
And I think the counterpart in the front end is a component-based architecture, which is really, really well supported, and I want to say encouraged by React.
And so then on that, I mean, as an engineering manager and looking after a team of developers who sometimes can be a bit fickle and hard-headed about their approach and the technologies they choose, with these rapid changes, moving to React, how do you encourage your developers to be open to that type of mindset and change?
Yeah, look, I think the mindset that I'm pushing towards and that I'm encouraging is people to really focus on differentiating work, right? Like one thing that we do quite intensively at Atlassian is we want to align on a lot of best practices and patterns and technologies, and I've written software for many years. People are very particular about how they want to do things, but if you really deeply think about it, does it really matter how you, I don't know, format your code, right? Like I cared about that a couple of years ago. These days,
space or tab?
Auto format that for me, it's going to be fine.
Right.
I want to focus on differentiating work and really generating user value, and I think that is a mindset that I'm pushing for.
And that's a great approach. Are you making that type of mindset, best practices, those guidelines available to everyone as maybe open source?
That's right. So our system of guidelines, we're actually quite proud of that, and we made it open source. So if you're keen to learn a bit more on how we do things at Atlassian, check it out. It's on GitHub, Atlassian/Tangerine. Open source contributions are very welcome.
Awesome.
So that's a great introduction to the question that came in right at the start, which I want to leave to the end anyway, but. And I gotta love these Twitch usernames. Kick You Now wants to know what it's like to work at Atlassian.
Oh look, I'm working for Atlassian.
This is your opportunity to sell it.
Yeah.
Atlassian's hiring.
We are. Reach out. Look, I think I'm originally from Austria. I came to Sydney 5 years ago. I totally love it. I think one of the things that really makes me get up in the morning and come to work is there is a great sense of urgency and of I want to say, a desire to constant improvement, right? Like we're never satisfied, right? We reach something, it's good. Well, sure, we celebrate it, right? But then the question is, okay, how can we make it even better, right? Yeah. And that is something that I haven't seen at many companies. I see it every day at Atlassian.
Right, so is maybe maintain the status quo, it's successful, not really open to change at other organizations, but when you're listening to your customers and the feedback from them and always iterating and innovating, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
There's a couple of Atlassian values. One of my favorite ones is be the change you seek, and that's something that we're seeing every day.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Hannes, thank you very much for your time. It was very insightful to hear about one of our friends at Atlassian and how they may do things internally. Please, for our viewers, Hannes mentioned some references. You can go check out some of their best practices and guidelines. Thank you once again, Hannes, and thank you everyone out there.
Well, thanks, Dean.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Hannes.